Welcome to the Carleena Show, where ordinary people share their hero's journey. I'm your host, Carleena Angwin, and this is episode 24 of the podcast. Today on the show, we have Steve Kaplan. Steve is a comedy consultant for companies such as HBO, Disney, DreamWorks, and Sony. He teaches his comedy-intensive workshops around the world and is the author of The Hidden Tools of Comedy and The Comic Hero's Journey, two books we will be discussing today. You can visit the Carleena Show website at carleena.net. That's CARLEENA.net to learn more about Steve and link to the show notes. From there, you can find past episodes, connect on social media, and sign up for the mailing list. Thank you, Steve and Lorca, for video editing and production so we can post our episodes on the Carleena Show YouTube channel as well as the podcast. Now I bring you Steve Kaplan. If you could tell me just who you wrote The Comic Hero's Journey for and what was your inspiration for writing that?
I wrote it for people who are writing feature film comedies. Mm-hmm. And what inspired me was I've been teaching these workshops all around the country and all around the world. And it was originally based on my first book, which is The Hidden Tools of Comedy, mm-hmm. which are discrete, practical tools that help you write a stand-up routine, a television script, a film script. And people would ask me, so how do you use these rules if I'm writing a feature film? And that got me thinking, and I have a friend who wrote The Writer's Journey, Chris Vogler, and so I told Chris, I'm going to rip you off because you already ripped off Joseph Campbell, who wrote the Hero's Journey, and mm-hmm. I'm going to write the Hero's Journey from the point of view of comedy.
Yeah.
So that's how it started.
Okay. Well, I have to tell you, I actually bought The Hidden Tools of Comedy about 2 years ago because I went to, I got my MFA in nonfiction, and okay. I wanted to learn how to write, how to use your own experiences and turn them into, stories that are funny. But, I heard people reading different essays that they wrote, and I could tell that they were trying to be funny, but it just wasn't succeeding. And I felt like I was doing that too. So I did a lot of research and for different books, and I found yours and I read it, and I have it you can't see, but I have it in my hand right now, and it's just full of highlights and underlines and stars, and so I really got a lot out of that, and so I signed up for your mailing list, and when I saw that you had the Comic Hero's Journey come out, I thought, well, that's great because it ties into my theme, which is the hero's journey. So I've been a fan of yours for a couple of years now.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm not a film writer, but I enjoy writing. So you may not have intended me to be someone in your target audience, but here I am.
Well, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, everything you write is a story. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, every story is autobiographical. So, mm-hmm. So even if you're a journalist, there's part of your own story that seeps into what is supposedly completely impartial, but nothing's really ever completely impartial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the Comic Hero's Journey. So tell me, well, we discussed in our emails a couple different ideas of movies that we could look at so that you could paint a picture of what is the Comic Hero's Journey, what is the structure. And so now I had mentioned The Big Sick.
The Big Sick.
Mm-hmm. And so, but in your book, you had mentioned one of the movies that you used was Groundhog's Day.
Groundhog Day, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Bridesmaids.
Mhm.
The Big Sick follows some of it, but it's really more of a boy meets girl, boy loses girl,
Mhm.
girl falls into coma, boy meets girl's parents, and a love story ensues between the parents and the boy. And then
Right.
when the girl wakes up, he uses that to get her back.
Right, right. Okay, okay. So, so how about we go through the comic hero's journey with Groundhog's Day? So, if you could,
Okay.
yeah, and then I want to get your feedback as far as how do you use like personal, like real life events that could be tragic or sad, like the Big Sick, but
Okay.
how you could use that to incorporate that into a comic hero's journey. So,
Okay.
okay, yeah.
Okay. And what kind of writing are you working on?
Um,
Memoir?
well, yeah, it's a kind of a hybrid. It's part memoir and part third person reported, and it's intertwined. But um, but I learned a lot from your book because um, well, I mean, I don't want to go into detail about what it is. I don't want to
Okay.
talk about me, but I want to talk. But some of the things that happened in my childhood, looking back now, they're funny. But at the time, I wasn't trying to be funny. I was trying to succeed. I was trying to get, I had a goal and a mission, but I had very limited skills and tools to get there. And so,
Right.
looking back, it's funny. And so, so I learned from you and the hidden tools of comedy that if I could, incorporate that in such a way that there's humor but without trying to be humorous, you know?
Right.
So,
Without trying to be quote unquote funny.
yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So, why don't you go ahead and tell us about the Groundhog's Day and how that fits the structure of the comic hero's journey?
Okay. But I'm actually much more interested in your memoir, but we'll get back to that. Um,
Okay.
uh,
Maybe.
the the comic hero's journey is a look at the hero's journey, and we all know what the hero's journey is, right? If you've
Mhm.
seen Star Wars, you've seen the hero's journey. You have somebody who doesn't know it, but they have greatness within, like Luke Skywalker,
Mhm.
and there's a call to adventure. The droids come and say you've got to get this information to the rebellion. There's the refusal of the call because at first the hero says, not me. And then you meet the mentor, you cross the threshold. He goes into Mos Eisley. He meets allies and enemies. He meets up with Chewbacca and Han Solo. He
Mhm.
runs across Darth Vader. There's an ordeal. There's a resurrection. And eventually the hero gains the magic elixir, whatever that may be.
Mhm.
And he returns with the magic elixir, and the magic elixir is going to uh, heal the community. I mean,
Mhm.
that was the whole idea. The whole idea is that the hero does heroic things. His community is hurting, and so he goes out into the unknown. He braves dragons and Death Stars, and he comes back with a great boon.
Mhm.
In Star Wars case, it's like he's one of the last Jedi's and he's gotten the Force. The Force is strong within this one, and the Force helps him destroy the Death Star, and therefore the rebellion is lives to fight another day, or at least it lives to fight for 8 more films and counting.
Mhm.
So, the comic hero's journey takes a look at that same structure, and it notices that in comedies things are different. So, for instance, in the hero's journey, the hero has greatness within, only they don't know it yet. But in the comic hero's journey, your protagonist, your character, does not have greatness within. Your character is as far from greatness within as is humanly possible. Your character is a jerk, or a dweeb, or a nerd, or some kind of broken person, some kind of character with that's missing something, with a hole in them. And if you take a look at Groundhog Day, for instance, you know, Bill Murray plays Phil Connors, who's a weatherman. And the weather, he's clever, he's funny, he's sexy, of a sort. But he's also a jerk. He's a cynical, selfish jerk. Now, the difference in the comic hero's journey is, whereas the hero in Star Wars is aware that they're missing something. Luke Skywalker says, if only I could join the rebellion. I want to be a pilot. He's aware that something is missing, and so even though he refuses the call at first, he's very open to the adventure because he's looking for something. But in the comic hero's journey, your character's not looking for something. Your character's happy the way they are. They, whether it's Steve Carell in 40-Year-Old Virgin, who's, he's made his adjustments. He's not going to go for girls anymore. He's just happy, playing Halo at home and playing, learning to the tuba and all the weird things he does to make up for the fact that he's got no relationships. But he's not looking for a relationship. As he says, he respects women. He respects women so much he doesn't have anything to do with them. In Phil Connors' case, he's a jerk, but he's happy that way. He doesn't say to himself, oh, I'm a jerk, I need to change. No, he doesn't want to change. Characters in comedies don't want to change. They want to stay the same. Kristen Wiig in Bridesmaids has lost her job, lost her cupcake, her bakery shop. She's in this horrible, horrible relationship with John Hamm, who just comes over for booty calls and doesn't even let her sleep the night. But that's all she knows, and that's all she really wants. She's accepted that. And what happens in the comic hero's journey is that we see them in the normal world. We see them in their normal world. They think everything's working out for them, but we in the audience can see that it's far from working out for them. And then you have the next stage, which we call WTF, or what the bleep.
Yeah.
And in that stage, something happens, either fantastical and impossible, or possible but improbable. Something happens to push our protagonists out of their comfort zone. In Groundhog Day, he finds that he's living the same day over and over again. Could that ever happen? No. But if it did happen, how does this guy deal with it? In Bridesmaids, all that happens is that her best friend, the only thing that she's really clinging on to, because everything else in her life isn't working, but her best friend finds another better best friend and starts to threaten the whole underpinnings of her life. In 40-Year-Old Virgin, his secret is discovered by his other three workmates at Smart Tech. And that starts to, again, destroy the fragile life that they've built for themselves. So the next stage after WTF is reaction. And the first part of reaction is denial. In all the movies that I've cited, they desperately try to get back to where they were. Bill Murray, Phil Connors, tries to figure out a way. He goes to a psychiatrist. He goes to a neurologist. He goes drinking at a bar. He's trying to figure out, how can I stop this? In 40-Year-Old Virgin, Steve Carell, is sleepless that night after they found out his secret at a poker game. But he walks in the next day hoping that everybody has forgotten it, nobody notices it. Of course, they start saying, hey, here's the Virgin, and of course it's ruined. So what happens is that your first reaction is to hope it's not true, and to try to return to the normal world that they're aware of. But in the comic hero's journey, you can't return to the normal world. So part of reaction is the sense that now these heroes, these comic heroes, these less than perfect people, these much less than perfect people, have to then adjust. They don't want to adjust. They haven't looked forward to adjusting. There's no amount of transformation that they have wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But now, despite themselves, they're going to have to make some transformations. So you have start to have in reaction, you start to see your protagonist take small steps to try to deal with this new situation, and the small steps are usually selfish and short-sighted. They're not looking, since they're not looking to transform themselves. Phil Connors is not looking to become a better person. He simply tries to figure out, okay, if I'm going to live live the same day over and over again, what are the rules? And the rules are he can do anything he wants, and there's no consequence. Mm-hmm. So he wakes up, he kisses the landlady full on the lips because there's no consequences. The annoying insurance salesman says Phil Connors, and he says Ned, and he punches him out because there's no consequences. Mm-hmm. And what he figures out is that if he simply goes to a pretty girl and asks her her name, where she went to high school, and who was her 12th grade English teacher, he can come back to her the next day. She won't remember any of it. Mm-hmm. And he'll say, Carleena, as though he knew her. And he'd say, you went to Stuyvesant High School? You had, Mr. Jenkins? And of course, he goes to sleep with all the girls. And so you see that the characters are making adjustments, but there's no growth, mm-hmm. which we call connections. The hero has either been oblivious to his own faults or scrambling to deal with the new situation. And in connections, they start to slow down. And for the first time, you start to really connect on a human level with the other characters. So this is the point in Groundhog Day when Phil Connors just talks to Andy McDowell and says, I'm living the same day over and over again. Now, he did that in the very first scene, the first couple of scenes in the movie, but she didn't believe him. But now that he's lived through this over and over again, and he's found out how shallow this existence is if he's just living selfishly, he wants her to share this with him because even though he doesn't know it, but we in the audience knows it, he's fallen in love with her. So he says, I know everything. How would I know all this stuff if I wasn't living the same day over and over again? And he goes around the diner and he tells everybody's story. And this woman came from Ireland, and this guy left the Navy, but he wished he didn't. And then he describes her, and he says, you like the ocean, but not the water, and he really knows her. And what's apparent to us in the audience, even though it's not apparent to him, is that this selfish, cynical jerk is becoming observant, aware, sensitive. And so in connections, their characters slow down and they begin to realize the transformations that are happening, not only around them, but also within them. And the next stage is new directions, because another difference between Star Wars, say, and a comic film, a comic hero's journey, is that in Star Wars, your main character usually has one overriding goal. The goal is, in Star Wars, I'm going to join the rebellion and become a pilot. And what happens by the end of the film? He's joined the rebellion and he's become a pilot. In most dramatic stories, in most heroes' journeys, your character is trying to get the bad guy or save the world, and that's their goal. But in comedy, because our characters start off as broken people, as less than perfect people, much less than perfect, they start off their stories with selfish, short-sighted goals. And what we have in the comic hero's journey is we have what's called the discovered goal. That because they're transforming, even though they're not aware that they're transforming, their goals are transforming. So at the beginning of Groundhog Day, all Phil Connors wants is to get a better job at a bigger television network. But what happens as he progresses through this endless day is that he realizes what he really wants is Rita. And if he can just get Rita to believe in him, everything will be okay. So he spends the day with her. He reads poetry to her, and he wakes up the next day. And even though she won't remember him and she won't remember the day, he remembers it. So he wakes up and he's got a new jump in his step, and he's got a new positive outlook on life, and he learns how to play the piano. Now, in many comic heroes' journeys, what would follow is what we call detachment, where there's a breakup. Usually in a romantic comedy, the lovers break up, or in a buddy film, the friendship breaks up, and what's important to note is that this is not a formula. By that I mean all these elements occur in a story. They don't necessarily have to occur in the same order, or in an order that any other story has told. So in Groundhog Day, he goes through a period of depression where he kills himself, and because he wakes up the same day over and over again, he can't even kill himself successfully. He kills himself over and over and over again, but he's very, very depressed, and the movie turns very dark. But that happens before Connections. Whereas in many typical romantic comedies, like 40-Year-Old Virgin, you have a big fight scene between Catherine Keener and Steve Carell, and that's your depression sequence, and which is followed by the last part of the comic hero's journey, which is race to the finish. Now, in most films, most comedies, we are aware of this aspect of the story, and we've seen it a lot of times. We've seen Dustin Hoffman racing from San Francisco to Pasadena to stop Elaine from marrying the wrong guy. We've seen Billy Crystal run through the streets of New York to get to the New Year's Eve party just in time to tell Meg Ryan that he loves her. So there is a lot of examples of literal races to the finish. But even in a quiet film like Enough Said, which is a movie with Julie Louis-Dreyfus and James Gandolfini, which is kind of a quiet film, written and directed by Nicole Holofcener, who just lost out for the best adapted screenplay, and she was robbed. I got to tell you, she was robbed for Can You Ever Forgive Me? The action that Julie Louis-Dreyfus does at the end of this romantic comedy is she's lied to James Gandolfini. She's kept something secret that she shouldn't have, and he's broken up with her, and it's broken her heart. And all she does is she drives by his house and parks. And one day he comes out and he sees her, and she kind of nods at him, and he kind of nods at her, and he kind of motions for her to come out of the car to sit on the stoop with him. And it's a very small thing, but it's an action. So what it means is that your character has to take action. Your character has to take action at this moment in the story, at this juncture in the journey. In Groundhog Day, what does he do? He's discovered that no matter what he does, for good or for ill, he wakes up the next day and he's got to start all over again. And now he's in the first part of the film, he lived very selfishly. He robbed a Wells Fargo truck, armored car. He goes to sleep with all the girls in town. He does, everybody but Rita. But it's a shallow, meaningless existence. So what he does near the end of Groundhog Day is he gets up and he decides, I'm going to spend my day being of service to others. And that's what he does. He gives the best news report he has in him about the groundhog not seeing its shadow or seeing its shadow. He then catches a kid who falls from a tree. He goes around. He fixes the tires of an old lady's car. He gives some guy a Heimlich maneuver. He does whatever he can to make everybody's day better. And the important thing, especially in a comedy, is even though he's transforming, he's becoming a better person. The important thing to remember is he's still not perfect. He's still human like you and me. My favorite moment in this sequence is after he delivers the eulogy to the groundhog. And Rita says, that's great. That was surprising. He says, yeah, sometimes I even surprise myself. She says, well, do you want to get some coffee? He says, I'd love to. Can I have a rain check? I have some errands to run. And she says, errands? What errands? We just got here. And that the next thing you see is he's running because he realizes he's late. He's running to catch the kid who's about to fall out of the tree. The kid falls out of the tree at the same time, at the same place every day. He catches the kid. And what would a perfect person say? A perfect person would say, listen, young man, be careful. I hope you're okay. Give your best to your mom and dad. That's what a perfect person would say. But what does a human being say? What does Phil Connors say? He says, what do you say? What do you say? You have never thanked me. You've never thanked me. I'll see you tomorrow, maybe, because he's selfish enough and he's human enough to want to be thanked for the good that he's doing. So that's race to the future, race to the finish. And at the end of the comic hero's journey, no matter how you tell your story, there's got to be the promise of a better world. In some way, there's the promise that even though they've gone through this amazing or unbelievable experience, that a better world is in the offing for them. So we can kind of analyze a lot of comedy films that way, but they all have that central the central truth that your protagonist is not perfect, and somehow the experience, this incredible, almost unbelievable experience, transforms them. Even in The Big Sick, which is not a kind of a classic comic structure. In that way, it's what's the classic rom-com? Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl. In The Big Sick, it's boy meets girl, boy loses girl, girl falls into coma, boy meets parents, parents fall in love with the boy, and somehow all together, when the girl finally wakes up, the boy gets the girl because the boy has become a better person. The boy stops hiding who he is from his family and himself and from the girl, and there's even though the Big Sick doesn't end with them in a big relationship, it ends with them with the promise of a better world. She comes to see him at a stand-up routine, and there's the promise that things will be better. Things will. So that's kind of a very quick look at the at the comic hero's journey, if you're looking at it through the context of Groundhog's Day or The Big Sick or 40-Year-Old Virgin.
You offer comedy workshops all over
Yes.
the world. And how often do you have people who come to you who want to write about, either for film or for a book or for stand-up, information or stories from their own lives, so personal stories?
A lot of people. I mentioned that all writing is autobiographical ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
Some people use their lives as the basis of stories, or some people use parts of their lives to enhance other stories.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about Groundhog Day, there's a moment in Groundhog Day near in the section of connections
Mm-hmm.
when he finally convinces Rita that it's really happening to him.
Mm-hmm.
And she sees that it's midnight, and she says, has it happened? And he says, no, it doesn't happen at midnight, and I didn't say it was going to happen at midnight. And she said, you faker. And he said, does this mean you're going to leave? And she says, no. And we cut, and it's hours later, but not 6 o'clock, because it always happens at 6 a.m. in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
It's hours later. It's like 3 or 4, and she's asleep, and he's reading a poem to her, and he starts to put her to bed, just kind of put the covers over her, and he starts to tell her everything that's in his heart that he couldn't say to her face because it's too intimate. It's too real.
Mm-hmm.
And that scene comes out of a conversation that Harold Ramis had with Bill Murray, because that's what happened to Bill Murray. Bill Murray told Harold Ramis about his marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And when they got to where they were going for the honeymoon, his wife was exhausted and she fell asleep. And while she was sleeping, Bill Murray, because he's this, kind of, hard bitten, not no heart on his sleeve, Chicago guy.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Murray told her everything that was in his heart that he would feel uncomfortable kind of just telling her to her face.
Mm-hmm.
And Harold Ramis heard this lovely story and put it right in the film. It goes right in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a Groundhog Day dance at the end of the film. There wasn't originally a Groundhog Day dance in the first script, but when Danny Rubin and Bill Murray went to Punxsutawney to kind of scout things out, they found out, hey, at the end of every Groundhog Day, there's a Groundhog Day dance. So they put that in the film. Mm-hmm. And they saw a poster for a bachelor auction, and they put that in the film. Mm-hmm. So the fact is that everything that's happening to you becomes the basis of the material that you use for your fiction or nonfiction. Mm-hmm. And if you're writing a memoir, you're using parts of your own story mm-hmm. to write your memoir, but not the whole story, mm-hmm. because what you're really doing is you're shaping your story to elucidate a theme. Mm-hmm. Whatever the theme is, whatever the overarching idea is that you're trying to get out. And in a comedy, what's important in using your own story is that there's a thin line between comedy and complaint. Mm-hmm. So if you're writing a story about something that happened in your own life, let's say it's a person who's writing about their dating experience, say. Mm-hmm. And if you use that time to complain about the people who were bad dates, that's complaint. Mm-hmm. Because let them write their own memoirs. Let them do their own one-person shows. the point of view of comedy is that you're telling the truth about a human being, and the human being that is the closest to you that you can tell the truth about is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great film called 500 Days of Summer, and written by these two guys, and one of the guys started writing it because he had been dumped by this girl, and she broke his heart, and he was angry at her, and so he wrote the first couple of drafts as a revenge hit piece.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to get back at her for all the rotten, terrible things she did to him. And at a certain point, his writing partner said, "The hell with her. I don't care about her. Let her write her own movie.
Mm-hmm.
How did it affect you? What did you learn from it?" And that's when the whole movie turned around and evolved into a kind of a fairy tale about a guy who met Miss Right,
Mm-hmm.
but he wasn't Mr. Right. And what do you do then? And it was about his transformation and him growing up and him learning lessons,
Mm-hmm.
not pointing the finger at her. As he describes her in the opening credits, what a bitch.
Mm-hmm.
But it really became about how the character played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, how he evolved and how he grew up and what he did with that experience and how it benefited him.
Right.
So you take what's really happening to you, and you have to find, if you're finding fault, you have to find the fault in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The fault lies not in our own stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. They say in Julius Caesar, and it's true, because you can't blame other people.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta find the truth in yourself. One of the great things about 40-Year-Old Virgin is it's so clear that it could have been a terrible movie, starring, I don't know, I don't want to,
That's okay.
who's the guy who did, American Gigolo? Rob Schneider. Rob's probably a great guy. I don't know him personally, but the movies that he makes, are japes. They're farces.
Mm-hmm.
They're broad farces. And what's brilliant about what Steve Carell and Judd Apatow did was, rather than making it a joke about him, or making it a joke about the three guys who are helping him,
Mm-hmm.
they really just became four people who are struggling, who are silly in their own ways and stupid in their own ways, but just struggling to do the one thing that we all want to do, which is figure out how you can be in a relationship with somebody and make it work. That's the hardest thing in the world.
Yeah, yeah. So for the people who come to your workshops who are either writing film or books or stand-up or whatever it is, and they want to draw from personal experiences, not just draw from personal experiences, but to create a piece that's based on their experience, how would you instruct them or advise them to look at like the parameters of even how to think about like a certain time period, and to think of like the transformation and the structure? So let's say someone is just getting started. They're thinking, I have this time period in my life where I want to write about it, and parts of it are funny, maybe parts of it are sad, but I want to bring out the humor in that situation. What would you offer that person? What suggestions would you give them to even start thinking about how they can create a story that's based on their life, that's a comedy?
If you think of a story like the classic Aristophanic structure of the three-act structure, which is, in a comedy, a guy gets himself stuck up a tree. They throw rocks at him. That's Act 2, and the guy figures his way down out of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to start with, well, when you got down out of the tree, where were you and who were you? So you start there. You kind of start there, and then you work your way backwards.
Mm-hmm.
So who was I to begin with? What lessons did I learn when I got out of the tree?
Mm-hmm.
What didn't I know when I got up the tree? And how can I show that progression, that transformation, that arc? And it's difficult. Listen, because people's past is full of pain, and you think that the idea is that what I do is I write about who hurt me and what I got out of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a drama. In a comedy, you have to take the responsibility yourself. You have to write about who was I and what happened to me and what did I eventually become because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are certain things that would be very, very hard to make comic, but not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Being sexually abused as a young person. There, have there been a lot of funny sexual abuse, uh, uh, you know, stories or one person plays? Not a lot, but there have been some.
Mm-hmm.
Nanette, by what's the name of that? She's a Scottish. No, I mean, no, she's an Australian comic. Hannah, I can't remember. Hannah Gadsby, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually about. It's a one person show, and it's really about when she was attacked,
Mm-hmm.
and she figures out a way both to make it comic, not the attack itself, but to also talk about how she's not going to make fun of it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
She's not going to downplay it anymore. So you can have important, even dark themes, but you can still treat it in a comic way. Mm-hmm. I've worked with a couple of people who have had trouble with that because they couldn't let go. This one person, her marriage went bad. Her relationship went bad. She got disinherited, and she couldn't figure out how she wasn't the victim
Mm-hmm.
in that. And I tried to tell her that, yes, those bad things happened to you, but you're the dope that it happened to.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what you write about. You write about the dope that it happened to. Mike, can you pronounce his last name? I can never get his last name right. Brigubla, something. The guy who wrote Sleepwalking.
Oh, yeah. I can't pronounce it.
Okay, neither of us can pronounce your last name, Mike, but I'm sure people know what we're talking about.
Birbiglia? Mike Birbiglia?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a brilliant piece
Yes.
about how he almost killed himself.
Yes.
And the reason it's funny is because he's not blaming anybody about it. He's just kind of agog with the amazement that it happened to him, and he's still living to talk about it.
Yes.
So I think when people come to me, they have to, and they want to use their experiences as a way to jump into comedy. They have to see the ridiculousness of themselves in the situation.
Right.
If they can't, then they're going to have a hard time. They might as well write a scathing, angry drama or opinion piece in which they blame people.
Right.
One of the things that I try to do is when people ask me this question, I tell them about a time in which I was mugged in New York. Mm-hmm. Now, have you ever been mugged or attacked?
No.
Okay, you can imagine it's not fun, right?
Right.
You can imagine there's nothing funny about it. And yet, in talking about the fact that this guy came into my office. I had a small office at a small theater on 42nd Street, and he says, this guy, Mr. Klurman, sent me upstairs to get a job, and I had an office in the Harold Clurman Theater, and what you should know is that Harold Clurman was a famous author and director, and he died 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he died 30 years ago before the story takes place.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously this guy, this street guy from 42nd Street is looking for something, and I was young and full of myself, and I said, well, Mr. Clurman isn't here. And he said, well, he told me to come up here for a job. And I said, well, Mr. Clurman, you're going to have to leave. And I said, if you don't leave, I'm going to call the police. And I'm behind this desk, this receptionist desk, and he's in front of the desk. And there's about maybe 1.5 yards, 2 yards between us. Mm-hmm. And so like an idiot, I pick up the phone. And the next thing I know, the phone has been thrown across the room. And he says, you're going to call the police on me? And I go, and then he hits me. And he hits me really hard. My glasses fly off. Mm-hmm. And I would have been in real trouble because I'm not a very physical guy. I haven't been in a lot of fights. And if I were, I probably would have lost them. But what I found interesting was that he would hit me and then he would announce something. He would go, you're going to call the police on me and hit me. You're going to call the police on me and hit me. And after every time he would say something, I would have a chance to recover. And so after he said, you're going to call the cops on me. And I kind of very ineffectively tried to hit him back. And then he said, oh, you're going to hit me? And I thought to myself, oh my God, I don't even get to hit the guy. So this goes on for a little bit of time. And he gets me in a headlock and he's trying to choke me. And he gets me down, and I'm at crotch level. I'm looking right at his crotch, and the thought crosses my mind: what would Jim Rockford do? Because I'm of the age in which I used to watch the Rockford Files, and so I thought to myself, what would Jim Rockford do? And so I just I put out a little jab, right in his the groin section, and he jumps up like 2 feet. He runs out the door. I crawl back to my desk. I'm getting ready to call the police when I realize I had made a terrible mistake. I forgot to lock the door. Oh. And I turn around and he's come back. He ran into the bathroom because we didn't have bathrooms in the office. We had a little bathroom in the hall. He ran into the bathroom and he comes back with a plunger. Oh. And he starts hitting me with the stick end of the plunger. And I grab a 3-hole punch. And I'm here to tell you that office supply saved my life. And I'm hitting him. I'm trying to fend. I'm trying to duel his plunger with a 3-hole punch. And eventually he kicks the shit out of me. He leaves. But you see, I got you to laugh a couple of times.
Yeah.
Because I made myself the butt of humor.
Uh-huh.
And not by making myself ridiculous, but by just telling the truth about what I did and what ridiculous thoughts went through my head.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And it's the absolute God's honest truth. Not one thing is made up.
Yeah.
Now, I could tell the story from the point of view of how terrified I was, mm-hmm. and how for months after that, I couldn't walk down the street without looking over my shoulder, afraid that this guy was going to be there.
Right.
I could tell it that way, and it would no longer be as funny.
Right. And it probably took you some time to gain some perspective and see the humor in it, because I'm sure in the moment you didn't think it was funny.
It took me about 2 hours.
Oh.
That's what I do. I see, I see the comic element in things. Uh-huh. Dorothy Parker once said that the trick or the secret of writing comedy is to have a sharp eye and a wild mind, mm-hmm. to see what's really there, but be able to take it to its furthest logical, illogical conclusion.
Yeah. Well, good. That brings me into my next question, because I I wonder what your thoughts are on comedy and comedians and also with mental health. And, this didn't even occur to me until a couple of years ago. I started listening to this, it's a British podcast, and he interviews comedians, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but I listened to it for a summer. And one kind of consistent theme from his guests were that they all had some sort of depression or anxiety or some sort of mental health issues they were going through, and yet they were all comedians.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if you could shed any light on that.
Well, I'm sure that there are depressed uh, accountants
Mm-hmm.
and uh, uh, mentally challenged actuarials or podiatrists. Um, but was it Sitcom Geeks? Because that's a British podcast that I've listened to. It might have been. Um,
I'll look
uh,
it up.
so so uh, Ray Romano once said that if he had been hugged once as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
he'd be an accountant. So I think it's it's not true that you have to be, have depression or have great mental uh, disabilities to be able to do comedy.
Mm-hmm.
It is true. I mean, because I can think of a lot of very well adjusted, on the surface, happy people um, who have been very successful in comedy. Most of them are Canadians.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you do need is you need to have an outsider's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a well-adjusted person, but you have to not be part of. You can't be swimming in the ocean. You've got to be somebody who is not in the same school of fish and notice how weird the ocean and that school of fish are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why comedy has been the province of outsiders, minorities, Jews, Canadians, people who are on the outside of the larger culture and are therefore a little bit able to notice it, notice what's weird and silly and absurd about it,
Mm-hmm.
while still participating in it. And yes, there are a lot of comedians, too many comedians, who have struggled. I mean, there was just the other day. Um, uh, I'm looking for his name. Somebody committed suicide, and um, uh, oh darn, I'm going to find it. But I mean, we all know about Robin Williams.
Right. Yeah.
Jonathan Winters famously had committed himself to a mental institution.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but uh, but I don't think it's a requirement. I think that if you have a sharp eye and a wild mind, sometimes that mind gets the better of you.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes finding out what's absurd and comic in the world is a way of it's one way of coping
Mm-hmm.
with the demons inside. Another way is self-medicating.
Mm-hmm.
So listen, there's something about people who desperately need other people to give them approval in terms of laughter. That's a very odd thing. We're very silly apes in that way.
Mm-hmm.
That we, because if you've ever tried stand up or gone to a stand up show, you know how the percentages are against you.
Mm-hmm.
That even great stand ups have terrible nights where nothing works. Um, and, and so I think that there's a his name is Brody Stevens, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Popular comedian Brody Stevens found dead in his home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that there's a relationship, but I think it's the relationship between anybody who has such a void in them that they need it filled by the adulation of others.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there are probably lots of comics and comic writers who are very happy in their own skin and don't require that kind of approval. But I also know a lot of people who are damaged, and some of those damaged people, may become drug. Listen, there are a lot of damaged people as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
and some of those damaged people become drug addicts or alcoholics
Mm-hmm.
or priests. Um, but some damaged people take their damage and share it with others in the form of art.
Mm-hmm.
And one form of art is the art of making people laugh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the same could be true for many artists. No
Yeah.
matter
Hey,
what the platform is, if it's comedy or
hey,
if
I don't
it's
know that
writing
Van
or
Gogh was so funny, but he had issues.
uh-huh. Yeah. So how do you manage your mental health and your well-being? What do you do to stay? Because you seem like you've got it together. So what is your secret?
For one, I don't have it together. Uh, uh, no one is more insecure and needy as I am. I will take my insecurity and my neediness up against anybody else. Uh, but I think um, I think kind of a combination of uh, not religion but spiritualism.
Hmm.
You know, I'm not an alcoholic, uh, but sometimes I wish I were, because those rooms are very comforting.
Hmm.
Someone once called alcoholism the sacred disease, because it's kind of an invitation to find a form of uh, spiritualism and a form of community that uh, that is apart from organized religion, but still is of the spirit.
Hmm.
So there's that, and then there's the just what is the lesson of Groundhog Day? Being of service to others,
Hmm.
and so that's what I try to do. I try to be of service to others while still being able to, you know, pay my mortgage and feed myself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what's next for you? You have is it
Well,
just the two books, or do you have more books out
well,
there?
I might have more than two books, but right now, doing those two books were difficult.
Hmm.
What did I forget? Was it Hemingway who said that writing is easy? All you do is go, sit in front of a typewriter and open a vein. Um, uh, but I'm also doing workshops. I have a workshop. I don't know when this podcast will be out, but I have a workshop March 2nd and 3rd in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
And you can find that out and find me at www.kaplancomedy.com. And you can email me at steve@kaplancomedy.com, or you could tweet me at skcomedy, or find me on Facebook, Steve Kaplan, or Steve Kaplan's Comedy Intensive. And then I think I'm going to London. We're still trying to make that happen. I think Kiev, Istanbul wants me to do a workshop. I just came back from Brussels, so that's what I know. That's what I know. But I do a lot of not only do a lot of workshops, but I also work with a lot of writers and producers working on everything from finished scripts to treatments and everything in between.
it's been great talking to you, Steve, and
You?
I feel like I've learned even more. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you take care.
Okay.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.